They said the rain god demanded tears. But no one imagined how many would fall, nor how small the throats from which they'd come. When the clouds refused to break and the maize shriveled in the fields, the priests of Tlaloc turned their eyes toward the children, the most innocent among them. Their cries, they said, would soften the heavens. And so, in the heart of Tenochtitlan, beneath the obsidian gaze of the serpent god, the altars ran wet, not with water, but with blood. If you've ever wondered how a civilization so advanced, so rich in poetry, astronomy, and beauty, could practice something so horrifying, stay with me. Because the truth behind the Aztec child sacrifices is darker and more human than myth ever dared to tell. Before we begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and join me on this journey into one of the most haunting rituals in human history, a story of fear, faith, and tears that touched the sky. The summer of 1454 was dry beyond memory. The lakes that once shimmered around Tenochtitlan had turned to mirrors of cracked clay. Canoes lay abandoned, their bellies split open by heat. The maize stalks had withered to brittle husks, and even the sacred pools near the temple of Tlaloc, the god of rain, had sunk into dust. People whispered that the god had grown angry, that their prayers no longer reached him. Children coughed from thirst, and mothers prayed to any god who would listen. In the marketplace, a woman once traded cacao beans for a bowl of water. By the end of the day, she was beaten for it. That was how precious water had become, worth more than gold, more than life. The priests watched the suffering from the steps of the great temple, their eyes tracing the horizon where smoke and sunlight blended into a haze. And then, as if guided by ancient memory, they began to speak of the old ways. The ones that pleased the gods when even prayer failed. Tlaloc, they said, did not hunger for blood like the war god Huitzilopochtli. He hungered for sorrow. For the sound of tears. His children, the Tlaloc, were the bringers of rain, and only through sacrifice could they be stirred. The Codex tells that those chosen were to be pure, untouched by sin, their tears falling freely as they approached the temple. To the Aztecs, this was not cruelty. It was a plea made with the purest offering known to man, innocence itself. No one wanted to be chosen. Yet when the priests came, cloaked in turquoise and white, families bowed their heads. To refuse was to curse your lineage. To accept was to lose what you loved most. The morning of the sacrifice arrived with a silence so heavy it felt alive. Even the wind refused to stir the dust. The chosen children were bathed in cool water drawn from what little remained in the temple basins. Their skin was anointed with fragrant oils, their hair woven with small white feathers meant to symbolize clouds. The priests moved with solemn grace, whispering prayers to Tlaloc, begging him to see their devotion. Around them, the city watched, tens of thousands of eyes filled with dread and belief. Mothers clutched each other, their nails digging into trembling palms. Fathers stood behind them, stone-faced, though some bit their lips until they bled. They told themselves this was mercy. That their children would become eternal rain-bearers in the heavens, playing among thunder spirits. It was a cruel comfort, but comfort nonetheless. The priest said that tears would water the sky. That sorrow was a sacred gift. A boy of 8, cool Seat Lolly, stood among the chosen. His gaze wandered to the clouds, thin and distant, like smoke. He asked his mother, "Will it rain soon?" She forced a smile through her tears. "Yes, my little star. You will help it rain." Her voice cracked, but she kept her hand steady as she placed a shell necklace around his neck, a symbol of the lakes that once were. When the drums began, the people fell silent. Each beat rolled through the air like a heartbeat of the earth itself. The children were led toward the temple steps, their tears already flowing. The priests collected them on woven cloths, believing each drop a message to the heavens. And as the procession ascended, thunder murmured faintly beyond the mountains, too distant to save, yet close enough to hope. The day of the procession began before sunrise. A pale mist hung over Tenochtitlan, veiling the temples in ghostly light. The chosen children were dressed in ceremonial garments dyed deep blue, the sacred color of water, the hue of Tlaloc's domain. Their cheeks were painted with white lines that symbolized rain trails, and small jade beads dangled from their wrists, clinking softly as they moved. To the people, they were no longer mortal. They were walking prayers. The city came alive in reverence and fear. From every canal and courtyard, families gathered to watch the children pass. Women burned copal and threw flower petals into the streets, their scent heavy in the air. Men bowed their heads as the priests walked past, their conch shell trumpets wailing like distant thunder. The air trembled with drums, slow, deliberate, echoing the rhythm of hearts that did not want to break. Each child was carried through the great causeway that cut across the lake. They were surrounded by chanting priests, their robes painted with frogs and clouds, symbols of the rain spirits. The sound of rattles, flutes, and morning songs filled the air. Yet beneath it all, there was silence, an invisible hush of grief. Seatlolly walked among them, his small hands clasped together. He looked back once toward the city's rooftops, where his mother stood at the edge, clutching a single flower. The wind caught her hair, and for a moment, it looked as if she were made of smoke. As the procession crossed the causeway, the sun began to rise. Its golden light struck the blue garments, making them shimmer like rippling water. It was beautiful, terribly, impossibly beautiful. And for a brief moment, even the drought seemed to pause. By midday, the procession had left the heart of the city behind. The path wound upward toward the sacred hills, where the altars of Tlaloc awaited. The drums softened, replaced by the faint cries of the children and the rustle of feathers from the priests' headdresses. Each step grew steeper, each breath thinner. Yet the priests continued to chant, their voices unwavering, calling out the god's name as though their words alone could summon clouds. The people followed from below, a sea of faces painted with ash and hope. Some carried offerings, flowers, corn, small figurines carved from obsidian. Others simply watched in silence, too afraid to speak, too broken to turn away. The chosen children moved between lines of blue smoke rising from burning copal. The scent mixed with the metallic tang of blood from the priest's earlier offerings. It was the smell of devotion and despair intertwined. Seatlolly stumbled once on the rocky path. A priest steadied him gently, whispering, "Be strong, little one. The god listens." The boy nodded, his lips trembling, eyes wet. His tears streamed down his painted cheeks, catching the sunlight like dew. The priests murmured in reverence, his sorrow was a blessing. At the final bend, the procession reached the stone terraces of the mountain shrine. From there, the entire valley lay open, parched and waiting. The high priest raised his arms to the sky and declared that the children's tears would soon fall as rain upon the fields. The crowd below fell to their knees, chanting the god's name until their throats cracked. The drums struck once more, echoing through the valley. A wind rose suddenly, sweeping dust across the mountainside. And as the priests led the children toward the altar, the first shadow of storm clouds appeared on the far horizon. Atop Mount Tlaloc, the air grew cold enough to sting the skin. The children shivered beneath their blue garments as the priests guided them toward the stone altar that faced the sky. From here, the whole valley could be seen, vast, sun-scorched, and waiting for mercy. Clouds hovered faintly in the distance, but none dared to cross above. The wind carried the smell of incense and fear. Every sound echoed, even the smallest sob. The priests formed a circle, each one holding obsidian blades polished until they caught the sun like black mirrors. They began to chant in Nahuatl, voices rising and falling in waves that sounded less human, more like thunder approaching from far away. "Tlaloc, Lord of the waters, hear our sorrow," they intoned. "Accept what is pure, and return the sky's tears to the earth." Seatlolly stood at the center beside the others. His small hands trembled as he looked up at the great stone face of Tlaloc carved into the cliff wall, eyes wide, fanged mouth open, forever thirsty. The priests told the children not to fear. They said the god would take them into his paradise, Tlalocan, where the rain spirits lived in endless spring. But even the promise of paradise could not still the fear that filled their hearts. The high priest approached Seatlolly and placed a hand over his chest. "You carry the hope of your people," he whispered. "Your tears will become rivers." Seatlolly tried to be brave, but when the chant grew louder, he began to cry. His tears fell upon the stone, and the priests gasped. It was said the god's blessing began with the first tear. Below them, thunder rumbled faintly, closer this time. The sky, it seemed, had begun to listen. The chanting deepened until it no longer sounded like words but like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. The priests lifted their arms toward the clouds, their turquoise ornaments clinking in rhythm with the drums. The children's cries rose with them, a chorus of pain that pierced the air. To the Aztecs gathered below, those cries were sacred, they were the language of rain. The louder the wailing, the greater the blessing, they believed. Seatlolly's tears streamed freely now, tracing pale lines through the blue paint on his cheeks. He looked once more toward the valley and whispered for his mother. The high priest murmured a prayer, then raised the obsidian blade. The edge glimmered for a brief moment before it fell. The air split with a sharp gasp from the crowd. Blood mingled with tears upon the altar stone, dark and shining beneath the sun. Then, as if answering, the first drop of rain struck the high priest's shoulder. He looked skyward in awe. Another fell. Then another. Within moments, the heavens opened. The crowd below erupted in cries of praise and grief. Mothers fell to their knees, their faces lifted to the downpour, their tears vanishing in the rain. The priests raised their hands, chanting louder, thanking Tlaloc for his mercy. The stone altar glistened red beneath the falling water, the storm washing away all trace of the sacrifice as though the god himself wished to hide what had been done. Seatlolly's body was placed among flowers, his face turned toward the sky he had helped awaken. The wind carried the scent of wet earth through the valley. And for the first time in many months, the lakes around Tenochtitlan began to rise again. The rain did not come as a drizzle, it came as a reckoning. Within hours, the sky darkened to the color of obsidian, and thunder rolled across the valley like the voice of the god himself. The people of Tenochtitlan poured into the streets, their faces turned upward, mouths open to drink the falling water. After months of thirst, it felt like salvation. Roofs overflowed, canals refilled, and the dry fields turned soft again under the relentless downpour. The priests stood upon the temple steps, soaked and trembling, their chants carried away by the storm's roar. They saw in the lightning a divine sign, Tlaloc had accepted their offering. The people bowed, crying tears that mingled with the rain, grateful and horrified all at once. Because beneath their joy, they knew what it had cost. Seatlolly's name was whispered like a prayer. Mothers told their children that the boy had become one with the clouds, that his laughter echoed in thunder. In the codices, scribes recorded the day as one of renewal, the drought broken, the god appeased. But in the quiet corners of homes, the truth hung heavier than the storm itself. Those who had given their children could not wash away the silence left behind. The rain continued for 7 days and nights. Lakes overflowed into fields, and fish returned to canals thought long dead. Crops revived, frogs sang, and life bloomed again. Yet as the people rejoiced, the priests already planned the next ritual, for they believed the god's favor must be fed continually. The storm had ended the drought, but not the hunger for sacrifice. In the eyes of the faithful, suffering had become the bridge between men and gods. And once built, that bridge could never be broken. When the storms finally eased, Tenochtitlan shone like a city reborn. The streets glistened beneath the morning sun, and mist rose from the temple courtyards as if the gods themselves were breathing. Farmers returned to their fields to find new shoots of maize piercing the wet soil. Children played in puddles, laughing where once they had cried. The city, for a moment, forgot the screams that had brought the rain. Yet the priests did not forget. Within the sanctuaries of the temple, they prepared new offerings, flowers, incense, and carved figures of jade and obsidian. They spoke of balance, of the endless exchange between mortals and the divine. The gods, they said, had given water, but water was life, and life always demanded repayment. The circle must not be broken. Some among the people began to question. Why must joy be purchased with grief? Why must the laughter of one child summon the rain for others? But few dared to speak aloud. The memory of drought was too fresh, the fear of divine wrath too great. And when the high priest declared that the rain was proof of the god's mercy, the people bowed again, trapped between devotion and dread. At night, the mothers who had lost their children lit small fires on their rooftops. They whispered to the wind, calling their names softly, asking the rain to carry their love upward to Tlalocan, the paradise said to await the sacrificed. And sometimes, when lightning flashed across the valley, they believed they saw their children's faces in the clouds. The empire flourished once more, the rivers ran full, and the gods were praised. Yet beneath the songs of gratitude lingered a truth that no storm could cleanse, that the rain had come at a terrible price. Centuries later, when the Spaniards marched into Tenochtitlan, they found the altars still glistening with obsidian stains. They called it savagery, unable to understand the faith that had driven a people to such extremes. But the Aztecs did not see cruelty in their offerings, they saw necessity. To them, life itself was a fragile pact between humans and gods, a balance sustained only by devotion. And when the skies refused to weep, they offered what was dearest, believing their sorrow would keep the world alive. The Spanish chroniclers wrote of the ceremonies with horror, yet even they noted the reverence, the solemn grace of the priests, the silence of the crowds. There was no madness in it, no frenzy, only a deep, tragic order. The Aztecs believed the gods felt through tears, and that by giving their own, they shared in the divine. It was not bloodlust, but faith shaped by fear. Long after the empire fell, the stories endured. The rain still came to the Valley of Mexico, washing over the ruins of the great temples. Farmers still offered flowers and coins to the lakes, whispering to Tlaloc to remember them kindly. In small villages, old songs were sung to the rhythm of distant thunder, verses that spoke of tears, clouds, and children who became rain. The god of water was never forgotten. His eyes, carved in stone, still stare across the mountains, unblinking, eternal. Some say that when storms sweep across the valley and lightning touches the old temple walls, you can hear faint cries beneath the thunder. Not screams, but the echo of something sacred, the sound of a promise made long ago, between man and the sky. Time moved on, but the memory of Tlaloc's tears clung to the land. The Spaniards built churches where temples once stood, their bells ringing over buried altars. Yet beneath the foundations, the old gods slept lightly. Farmers still whispered the old names when drought threatened their crops. Mothers told their children not to mock the rain, for Tlaloc listened even now. Faith changed its face but not its hunger, it still sought mercy from the sky. In the 20th century, archaeologists uncovered the great statue of Tlaloc near Coatlinchan, a colossal stone figure with eyes like storm clouds. When it was moved to Mexico City, thousands gathered to watch. As the truck carried the god through the streets, the skies darkened. Rain fell suddenly and fiercely, flooding the procession route. Some called it coincidence. Others whispered that Tlaloc was crying for being disturbed, for leaving his mountain home. Even today, people notice patterns. The statue stands before the National Museum of Anthropology, and visitors often find themselves drenched in unexpected downpours. It's become a quiet superstition: if you visit Tlaloc and it rains, he has accepted your presence. If the sky stays dry, you leave him flowers. What began as faith has become memory, and memory, in its persistence, is a kind of worship. The god who once demanded tears now gives them back freely, turning the air into silver threads that connect past to present. In every drop that touches the cracked earth of Mexico, there is a whisper that devotion does not vanish, that promises between gods and men are never entirely broken. And so, when thunder rolls across the valley, it is not merely weather. It is remembrance, a sky still weeping for what was once sacred.